Today we're going to go over comma usage. And we're going to go over comma usage from the Diana Hacker gradebook. From the Diana Hacker grammar book. So let's go over comma usage. And this time, yes, when I share screen, it actually shows up. So the comma was invented to help readers. Without it, sentence parts can collide into one another unexpectedly, causing misreadings. If you cook, Elmer will do the dishes. While we were eating, a rattlesnake approached our campsite. Add commas in the logical places, like after cook and eating, and suddenly all is clear. No longer is Elmer being cooked and the rattlesnake being eaten. Various rules have evolved to prevent such misreadings and to speed readers along. So use commas before coordinating conjunctions, joining independent clauses. When a coordinating conjunction connects two or more independent clauses, word groups that could stand alone as separate sentences, a comma must precede it. There are 7 coordinating conjunctions in English: and, but, or, nor, for, so, and yet. A comma tells readers that one independent clause has come to a close and another is about to begin. So the department sponsored a seminar on college survival skills, comma, and it also hosted a barbecue for new students. Exception: if the 2 independent clauses are short and there is no danger of misreading, the comma may be omitted. The plane took off and we were on our way. As a rule, do not use a comma with a coordinating conjunction that joins only 2 words, phrases, or subordinate clauses. A good money manager controls expenses and invests surplus dollars to meet future needs. The word group following and is not an independent clause. It is the second half of a compound predicate, controls and invests. Use a comma after an introductory phrase or clause. The most common introductory word groups are clauses and phrases functioning as adjectives. Such word groups usually tell when, where, how, why, or under what conditions the main action of the sentence occurred. A comma tells readers that the introductory clause or phrase has come to a close and that the main part of the sentence is about to begin. When Irvin was ready to iron, comma, his cat tripped on the cord. And so when a dependent clause is at the beginning of a sentence, use a comma. Near a small stream at the bottom of the canyon, the park rangers discovered an abandoned mine. And when a prepositional phrase comes at the beginning of a sentence, use a comma. The comma may be omitted after a short adverb clause or phrase if there is no danger of misreading. In no time, we were at 2,800 feet. Sentences also frequently begin with participial phrases that function as adjectives, describing the noun or pronoun immediately following them. The comma tells readers that they are about to learn the identity of the person or thing described. Therefore, the comma is usually required even when the phrase is short. Buried under layers of younger rocks, comma, the Earth's oldest rocks contain no fossils. Other introductory groups include transitional expressions and absolute phrases. Because we have been saving molding for a few weeks, comma, we had enough wood to frame all 30 paintings. So in this example, we always use a comma when a dependent clause comes at the beginning of the sentence. The car had been sitting idle for a month, comma, so the battery was completely dead. So we always use a comma before fanboys. For, and, but, or, nor, so, yet. Use a comma between all items in a series. When 3 or more items are presented in a series, Those items should be separated from one another with commas. Items in a series may be single words, phrases, or clauses. Langston Hughes's poetry is concerned with racial pride, social justice, and the diversity of the African American experience. So comma, comma, comma when you have words in a series. Bubbles of air, leaves, ferns, bits of wood, and insects are often found trapped in amber. So once again, items in a series. Although some writers view that the last comma in a series is optional, most experts advise using the comma because its omission can result in ambiguity or misreading. My uncle willed me all of his property, houses, and boats. The activities include touring the White House, visiting the Air and Space Museum, attending a lecture and the Founding Fathers, and kayaking on the Potomac River. Use a comma between coordinate adjectives, not joined with and. Do not use a comma between cumulative adjectives. When two or more adjectives each modify a noun separately, they are coordinate. Roberto is a warm, gentle, affectionate father. If the adjectives can be joined with and, the adjectives are coordinate, so you should use commas, warm, gentle. In other words, if you can separate the adjectives and say, Roberto is a warm and gentle and effective and affectionate father, and it still makes sense, then you could use commas because each of the commas stand for and. Beginning with the adjective closest to the O, 3 large gray shapes moved slowly toward us. Beginning with the adjective closest to the noun, shapes, these modifiers lean on one another, piggyback style, with each modifying a larger word group. Gray modifies shapes, large modifies gray shapes, and 3 modifies large gray shapes. Cumulative adjectives cannot be joined with and, so because you cannot say 3 and large and gray and shapes moved closely toward us. So when you have cumulative adjectives where one adjective describes another adjective, you can't use commas in the middle of the adjectives. You can only use commas between adjectives when they're coordinate adjectives, when it makes sense to go, Roberto is a warm and affectionate father. Coordinate adjectives. Should parents with severe irreversible brain damage be put on life support? Should patients with severe irreversible brain damage be put on life support systems? So adjectives that can be connected with and are coordinate severe and irreversible. Cumulative adjectives cannot use commas. Ira ordered a rich chocolate layer cake. Ira didn't order a cake that was rich and chocolate and layered. He ordered a layer cake that was chocolate, a chocolate layer that was rich. So when each of the adjectives describe the next adjective, that's known as a cumulative adjective, and you don't need commas. And then here you have a bunch of exercises. Use commas to set off non-restrictive, non-essential elements. Do not use commas to set off restrictive. In other words, if something is not important in the sentence, use a comma. If something is important to the sentence, do not use a comma. So a restrictive element defines the limits. Certain word groups that modify nouns or pronouns can be restrictive or non-restrictive. That is, essential or not essential to the meaning of a sentence. These word groups are usually adjective clauses, adjective phrases, or appositives. A restrictive element defines or limits the meaning of the word it modifies. It is therefore essential to the meaning of the sentence and is not set off with commas. If you remove a restrictive modifier from a sentence, then the meaning of the sentence changes. So restrictive, no commas, which means that it's essential to the sentence. The campers need clothes that are durable. Scientists who study the Earth's structure are called geologists. Non-restrictive elements. A non-restrictive element means that you're describing a noun and a pronoun whose meaning has already been clearly defined or limited. So because the modifier contains non-essential information, then it is set off with commas. If you remove a non-restrictive element from a sentence, the meaning is not going to change. Non-restrictive with commas. The campers need sturdy shoes, which are expensive. The scientists who represented 8 different universities met to review applications for the Advancements in Science Award. In the first sentence, the campers need sturdy shoes, and the fact that the shoes happen to be expensive is not very important. So we set it off with commas because it's supplemental information. In the second sentence, the scientists met to review applications for the award, and that the fact that they represented 8 different universities is not very important. Often it is difficult to tell whether something is important or not important. So both of these sentences are grammatically correct, but their meaning is slightly different. The dessert made with fresh raspberries was delicious. The dessert made with fresh strawberries was delicious. In the first example, the phrase made with fresh raspberries tells readers which of the 2 or more desserts the writer is referring to. In the example with commas, the phrase merely adds information about the dessert. Adjective clauses. Adjective clauses are pattern-like sentences containing subject and verb, but they function within sentences as modifiers of nouns or pronouns. They always follow the word they modify, usually immediately. Adjective clauses begin with words like who, whom, whose, which, that, or with a relative adverb, where and when. And so when you use adjective clauses, then the comma rules are slightly different. When an adjective clause is at the beginning of the sentence, you use 2 commas. If the adjective clause comes at the end of the sentence, depending on the meaning of the sentence, you would have no comma or 1 comma. So here is a non-restrictive clause with commas. Ed's house, which is located on 13 acres, was completely furnished with bats in the rafters and mice in the kitchen. So the adjective clause, which is located on 13 acres, does not restrict the meaning of Ed's house. The information is non-essential and is therefore set off with commas. Restrictive clause, no commas. The giant panda that was born at the San Diego Zoo in 2003 was sent to China in 2007. Because the adjective clause that was born at the San Diego Zoo in 2003 identifies one particular panda out of many, the information is essential and is therefore not set off by commas. Use that only with restrictive essential clauses. Many writers prefer to use which only with non-restrictive. That's true, huh? I didn't even realize this. Yeah, even I learned something new each day. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, yeah. So adjective clauses, prepositional or verbal phrases functioning as adjectives may be restrictive or non-restrictive. So what is the difference between a phrase and a clause? When you have a phrase, you just have a group of words with no subject and verb. When you have a clause, you have a group of words with subject and verb. And these group of words can be either independent, in other words, you could either have an independent clause or a dependent clause. But when you have adjective phrases, that means you don't have any subject and verbs. And so prepositional or verbal phrases functioning as adjectives may be restrictive or non-restrictive. Non-restrictive phrases are set off with commas. Restrictive phrases are not. Non-restrictive phrase with commas. The helicopter with its million candle power spotlight illuminating the area, so that's non-essential, circled above. Restrictive, meaning that it is essential. One corner of the attic was filled with newspapers dating from the early 1900s. The bill proposed by the Illinois representative would lower taxes for middle-income families. Appositives. An appositive is a noun or noun phrase that renames a nearby noun. Non-restrictive appositives are set off with commas. So those are the adjective clauses that occur at the beginning of the sentence, usually. Darwin's most important book, comma, on the origin of species, comma, was the result of many years of research. So that is a non-restrictive appositive. A restrictive appositive in which you have no commas, which means that the element is essential to the sentence. The song Viva la Vida, no commas, was blasted out of huge amplifiers. And then use commas to set off transitional and parenthetical expressions, absolute phrases, and word groups expressing contrast. So after a transition word, you always use a comma. Transitional expressions serve as bridges between sentences or parts of sentences. They include conjunctive adverbs such as however, therefore, and moreover, and transitional phrases such as for example, as a matter of fact, and in other words. When a transitional phrase appears between independent clauses in a compound sentence, it is preceded by a semicolon. So basically, when you have a transition word, if I say Bob is rich, then semicolon, however, comma, Mary is poor. That's all that means. So Min did not understand our language, semicolon, moreover, comma, he was unfamiliar with our customs. When a transitional word appears at the beginning of a sentence or in the middle of an independent clause, it is usually set off with commas. Yeah, so when you have an introductory phrase, like as a matter of fact, or a prepositional phrase at the beginning of the sentence, you got to put a comma. So as a matter of fact, American football was established in the mid-19th century. Parenthetical phrases. Evolution, as far as we know, doesn't work in this way. Absolute phrases. An absolute phrase, which modifies the whole sentence, usually consists of a noun followed by a participle. Absolute phrases may appear at the beginning or at the end of the sentence and should be set off with commas. The sun appearing for the first time in a week, comma. We were at last able to begin the archaeological dig. Elvis Presley made music history in the 50s, comma. His records having sold more than 10 million copies. Do not insert a comma before the noun and the participle in an absolute construction. The next contestant being 5 years old, the host adjusted the height of the microphone. Word groups expressing contrast. Sharp contrast beginning with words such as not, never, and unlike are set off with commas. The Epicurean philosopher sought mentally, comma, not bodily, pleasures. Unlike Robert, comma, Ray Marie enjoys managing the housing budget. Use commas to set off nouns of direct address. Forgive me, Angela, for forgetting your birthday. Yes, the loan will probably be approved. The film was faithful to the book, comma, wasn't it? Well, cases like these are difficult to decide. So use commas to set off nouns of direct address, the words yes and no, interrogative tags, and mild interjections. Use commas with expressions such as he said or she said. In his letter from Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, comma, We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Use commas with dates, addresses, titles, and numbers. So on December 12th, 1890, orders were sent out for the arrest of Sitting Bull. Addresses. The elements of an address are also, you have to separate with commas. John Lennon was born in Liverpool, England. Liverpool, England, in 1940. Please send the package to Greg Tarvin at 708 Spring Street, Washington, Illinois, 61571. Titles. If a title follows a name, set off the title from the rest of the sentence with a pair of commas. Ann Hall, MD, has been appointed to the Board of Trustees. In numbers more than 4 digits long, use commas to separate the numbers into groups of 3, starting from the right. Oh, that's right, I learned that in math. Yeah, okay. Do not use commas in street numbers, zip codes, telephone numbers, or years with 4 or fewer digits. Use a comma to prevent confusion. In certain situations, a comma is necessary to prevent confusion. If the writer has intentionally left out a word or phrase, for example, a comma may be needed to signal the omission. To err is human, semicolon. To forgive, divine. If 2 words in a row echo each other, a comma may be needed for ease of reading. The catastrophe that we had feared might happen, happened. Sometimes a comma is needed to prevent readers from grouping words in ways that do not match the writer's intention. Patients who can, walk up and down the halls every day. And then unnecessary commas. Do not use a comma with a coordinating conjunction that joins only 2 words, 2 phrases, or subordinate conjunction. Ron discovered a leak and came back to fix it. So when you have compound predicates, we don't need a comma. We knew that she had won, but that the election was close. The coordinating conjunction but links 2 subordinate conjunctions, each beginning with that. Do not use a comma to separate a verb from its subject or object. A sentence should flow from subject to verb, verb to object without unnecessary pauses. Commas may appear between these major sentences only when a specific rule calls for them. Zoos large enough to give the animals freedom to roam are becoming more popular. So here we don't need a comma to separate this whole thing is a subject, and then this is the verb. So we don't separate the subject and the verb. Do not use commas before the first or after the last item in a series. Though commas are required between items in a series, do not place them before or after the whole series. Other causes of asthmatic attacks, and so we don't need a comma between R and stress. We put the comma after the first word in the items in a series. Ironically, even novels that focus on horror and alienation, and we don't need a comma after alienation, often have themes of spiritual renewal and redemption as well. Do not use commas between cumulative adjectives, between an adjective and a noun, or between an adverb and an adjective. Commas are required between coordinate adjectives, those that can be joined by an, but they do not belong between cumulative adjectives. In the corner of the closet, we found an old maroon hat box. So we don't need a comma after the cumulative adjectives old and maroon. A comma should never be used between an adjective and the noun that follows it. It was a senseless, dangerous mission. Nor should a comma be used between an adverb and an adjective. Oh, that's interesting. So the hillside is a good home for severely disturbed youths. Do not use commas to set off restrictive elements. Restrictive elements are modifiers or appositives that restrict the meaning of the nouns that follow. Because they are essential to the meaning of the sentence, they are not set off by commas. The semicolon. Use a semicolon. Oh, okay, so this is a different chapter. So that's it for this video on comma usage. And in my next video, I will talk about semicolons and how to use semicolons. And just as a little temptation so that you could go to the next video. So when do we use a semicolon? We use a semicolon in between the sentences in a thesis statement. We use a semicolon, and in that case, the semicolon acts like and. So that's a little, preview of the next video that I'm going to do, which is going to be on semicolons. And so this part of the rules for writer's book, we're covering the punctuation part of the book. And so I will go over all the different punctuation, like today I went over comma usage, and eventually I'll get to semicolons, colons, periods, and the rest of it. And so if you enjoy learning about mechanics and punctuation, then this is the place for you. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me anytime.